What if the story of American power isn't as clean and heroic as we've been told? What if behind the shining skyscrapers, the military strength, and the global influence lies a foundation built on something far less noble? That's the question we're diving into today. Is American power built on exploitation? It's a heavy question, but it's also fascinating. Because the answer isn't just yes or no. It's a story of opportunity mixed with inequality, of ambition tied to injustice, and of progress that came with hidden costs. To understand it, we have to look at how the United States rose from a small group of colonies to the most powerful country in the world. And here's the reward for sticking with me until the end. You'll see the whole arc of how power was built, not just the victories, but also the struggles, the sacrifices, and the uncomfortable truths that usually get left out of the story. By the time we finish, you'll have a deeper understanding of America's rise than most people ever do. Ready? Let's start at the very beginning, where the seeds of American power were first planted. To understand America's power, we need to go back to the very start. The early foundations of the United States were not built on fairness or equality. They were built on land, labor, and control, and much of it came through exploitation. First, think about the land itself. Before European settlers arrived, North America was home to thriving Native American nations. They had their own systems of trade, culture, and governance. But colonization brought war, forced removal, and broken treaties. Millions of acres of land were taken, often by violence or deception. This land became the base of wealth for farms, plantations, and towns. Without it, the growth of the colonies would not have been possible. Then there's labor. From the 1600s onward, enslaved Africans were brought across the Atlantic in chains. They worked the fields of tobacco, cotton, and sugar, crops that generated enormous profits. Their unpaid labor fueled the Southern economy and fed global trade. It wasn't just the South that benefited. Northern merchants, banks, and shipbuilders also grew rich from this system. Slavery wasn't a side note. It was central to America's early wealth. But it wasn't only slavery. Poor European immigrants often came as indentured servants tied to harsh contracts. They worked long hours under brutal conditions, sometimes barely surviving their term of service. Exploitation touched many lives, though in very different ways. By the late 1700s, these foundations, stolen land and exploited labor, had built an economy strong enough to sustain independence from Britain. The Revolution gave birth to a new nation, but the system of inequality that powered it did not disappear. Instead, it became deeply rooted in American life. So when we ask, is American power built on exploitation? The earliest chapter of history gives us a clear answer. Yes, exploitation was not just present, it was essential. It created the wealth, the resources, and the momentum that allowed the United States to grow. But this is only the beginning of the story. Because what came next, the rise of factories, railroads, and industry, would show that exploitation wasn't left in the past. It simply changed its form. As America moved into the 19th century, the foundations of land and slavery expanded into something new: industry. This was the age of factories, machines, and booming cities. It was also the age of some of the harshest working conditions the country had ever seen. Immigrants poured in from Europe and Asia, chasing the promise of a better life. They found jobs in textile mills, coal mines, and steel plants. But those jobs came at a price. Long hours, low pay, and dangerous environments were the norm. Children as young as 10 worked alongside adults, often for 12 hours a day. Safety was an afterthought, and injuries were common. The industrial boom created wealth, but most of it flowed upward to factory owners, railroad tycoons, and oil magnates. Railroads, in particular, became a symbol of this growth. They connected the coasts, opened new markets, and fueled westward expansion. But behind the steel tracks were workers, many of them Chinese immigrants, who laid rails across mountains and deserts for meager wages. Thousands died from accidents, exhaustion, or brutal treatment. Their sacrifice made possible the transport networks that powered the national economy. Meanwhile, oil and steel transformed the United States into a rising industrial giant. Titans like John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie built fortunes that would shape the modern corporate world. Yet their success was built on squeezing every ounce of labor from workers who had little voice or protection. Strikes and protests erupted, sometimes ending in violence, as laborers fought for basic rights. This period also revealed another form of exploitation: urban poverty. Cities grew fast, but housing and sanitation lagged behind. Families were crammed into overcrowded tenements, while the wealthy lived in mansions just a few miles away. It was a stark reminder that progress for some often meant hardship for many. So while the Industrial Revolution turned America into an economic powerhouse, it also deepened inequality. The nation's strength was built on engines and steel, yes, but also on sweat, struggle, and sacrifice. And just when America was reaching new heights, the world itself would change. 2 world wars would come, and America would step onto the global stage like never before. After World War II, the United States stood almost alone on top. Much of Europe and Asia lay in ruins. American factories were running. American banks had cash. American farms had food. This moment set the stage for a new kind of power: global, financial, and military. Money came first. The U.S. helped rebuild Europe with loans and aid. In return, the dollar became the center of world trade. New institutions, built with heavy U.S. influence, set the rules for lending, exchange rates, and development. When your currency becomes the world's default, you gain leverage. You can borrow cheaply. You can shape markets. You can set terms. Security came next. The U.S. built alliances and opened bases across the planet. It promised protection to partners, and those partners often opened doors to resources and markets. Oil fields in the Middle East mattered. Raw materials in Latin America, Africa, and Asia mattered. Trade routes mattered. The message was clear: stability, but on U.S. terms. When leaders abroad threatened those terms, Washington sometimes pushed back hard. Pressure, covert action, and coups were used to keep friendly governments in place. The Cold War gave the cover story: stop communism. But beneath that, it was also about access and control. Keep prices low. Keep supply steady. Keep rivals weak. That is another face of exploitation, using unequal power to dictate outcomes. At home, prosperity spread, but not evenly. The GI Bill lifted many veterans into the middle class. Suburbs grew. So did universities and research labs. Yet barriers like redlining and job discrimination kept many people, especially Black Americans, out of that new wealth. Defense contracts poured money into select regions and industries. A military-industrial complex took root, turning global tension into steady profits. By the 1960s, the pattern was set. The U.S. used finance, force, and technology to anchor a world system that favored its companies and consumers. Cheaper inputs flowed in. Profits flowed back. The costs, wars abroad, repression of movements, and unequal gains at home were often hidden from the final price tag. This is how American power became global after the war, not only through ideals and aid, but also through leverage, pressure, and selective doors left open. Next, we'll see how the modern economy took this further by pushing production offshore and turning inequality into a business model. By the late 20th century, America's power shifted again. The factories that once roared in cities like Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland began to fall silent. Why? Because production was moving overseas. Companies discovered they could cut costs by hiring workers in countries where wages were far lower and protections were weaker. This was globalization in action, and it reshaped the American economy. Clothing, electronics, and later, even automobiles were increasingly made abroad. Workers in Asia, Latin America, and other regions took the jobs once held by Americans, but at a fraction of the pay. For corporations, profits soared. For U.S. consumers, products became cheaper. But for many communities at home, jobs disappeared and neighborhoods collapsed. Exploitation didn't vanish. It was just relocated to other parts of the world. Technology added another layer. Silicon Valley rose as the new powerhouse of innovation. Software, microchips, and later the internet transformed communication and business. Yet even here, the pattern remained familiar. Rare earth minerals for tech devices were mined in poor conditions abroad. Factories assembling phones and computers were filled with workers facing long hours and harsh environments. The sleek, modern image of technology masked an old truth. Low-cost labor still powered high profits. Finance also grew into a global force. Wall Street became the command center for investment flows across the world. Banks and hedge funds gained the ability to shift billions with a click, influencing entire economies. Developing nations often found themselves dependent on loans and investments that came with strict conditions. Once again, America's financial weight shaped choices far beyond its borders. At the same time, inequality at home widened. The wealth gap grew as corporate leaders and investors reaped the rewards of globalization, while many workers faced stagnant wages and uncertain futures. Entire industries shrank, and the so-called American dream became harder to reach for millions. So, the modern economy extended the old pattern: profit built on imbalance. Outsourcing, financial dominance, and technological reliance all kept America at the top, but at costs felt by workers abroad and at home. Next, we'll look at the other side of this story. Because even while exploitation shaped so much of American power, creativity, innovation, and resilience also played a role. So far, we've seen how exploitation fueled America's rise. But that's not the whole story. Power in the United States was also built on creativity, innovation, and a belief, sometimes flawed, sometimes real, in opportunity. To ignore that side would leave the picture incomplete. Think about invention. From the light bulb to the airplane, from the personal computer to the smartphone, American innovators shaped entire industries. These breakthroughs didn't just create wealth. They changed how people live around the world. They showed that progress can come from vision, not just from taking advantage of others. Education also played a role. After World War II, universities expanded dramatically. The GI Bill sent veterans to college, creating a new middle class. Research centers poured resources into science, medicine, and technology. This environment nurtured talent, drew minds from across the globe, and helped position the United States as a leader in knowledge and discovery. Democracy and opportunity, even when imperfect, also mattered. Millions of immigrants came to America chasing the chance to build a better life. Many found obstacles, but many also found paths forward. Their energy and ambition powered small businesses, art, music, and movements that enriched the nation's culture and economy. And we can't forget resilience. The country faced civil wars, depressions, and social unrest. Each time, struggles pushed the nation to adapt. Workers fought for rights, women fought for equality, and civil rights leaders demanded justice. These battles didn't erase exploitation, but they did carve out more space for fairness and inclusion. So, while exploitation was a constant driver of power, it wasn't the only one. America's rise was also fueled by the boldness to invent, the push to learn, and the refusal to stay down after failure. It's this dual story, dark and bright, that makes the U.S. both complicated and unique. In the end, power wasn't built only on taking, it was also built on creating. And that tension is what makes the final question so important. When we step back and look at the full picture, how should we answer? Is American power truly built on exploitation? So, is American power built on exploitation? The answer is not simple. On one hand, the story is undeniable. stolen land, enslaved labor, industrial abuse, and global leverage all shaped the foundations of U.S. strength. Exploitation was not a side detail. It was a central part of the engine. But on the other hand, America's rise also came from vision, invention, and resilience. From innovators who reshaped industries to movements that fought for justice, creativity, and struggle worked hand in hand. This mix of exploitation and innovation is what made American power so strong and so complex. When we look at the skyscrapers, the technology, and the global reach, we should also see the hidden costs. Power is rarely clean. It is built with both ambition and sacrifice, both brilliance and injustice. And the story of America is no different. Now the real question turns to us. Knowing this history, how should we understand power today? Is it something to admire, to question, or to change? That's a conversation worth having, because the lessons of the past are still shaping our future. If you stayed with me until now, thank you. You've gone deeper into America's story than most people ever do. If you found this eye-opening, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with others who care about history, power, and truth. Your support helps us bring more untold stories to light. And before you go, tell me in the comments, do you think America's power came more from exploitation or innovation? I'd love to hear your take.